Rain battered the glass walls of the penthouse, echoing the storm brewing inside Drayton Mercer's chest. He was the most feared man in Chicago, a kingpin who dismantled empires with a whisper. Yet, as he stared at the empty chair at the dinner table, he realized his gun and his money were useless against the silence of a 6-year-old girl. He had fired the nanny to protect his secrets, believing he was making a calculated executive decision. He was wrong. He didn't know that in the next 5 minutes, his daughter would whisper a secret of her own, one that would bring the godfather of the city to his knees and change the underworld forever. Thunder rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on the 45th floor of the Mercer Tower. Below, the city of Chicago was a grid of electric veins, pulsing with traffic and crime, all of which ultimately fed back to one man, Drayton Mercer. Drayton stood by the glass, his reflection ghostly against the night sky. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, and his posture was rigid, military-grade tension held in check by sheer will. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, staring not at the city, but at the reflection of the woman standing behind him. Elisha Cooper stood near the heavy oak doors of the study. She was 24, with messy auburn hair tied back in a practical clip and a sweater that had seen better days. She looked out of place in the sleek, brutalist architecture of Drayton's world, a splash of warmth in a room designed to be cold. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Mercer?" Elisha's voice was steady, though her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Drayton didn't turn around. He took a slow sip of the bourbon. "Pack your things, Elisha. You're done." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. I don't understand," Elisha stammered, stepping forward. "Is this about Penny? Did something happen? I just put her down for the night. Penelope is fine." Drayton cut in, his voice a low baritone that usually signaled violence. He finally turned. His face was a mask of indifference, the scar running through his left eyebrow, accentuating the hardness of his gaze. "This is about you. I no longer require your services." Elisha blinked, stunned. "Mr. Mercer, I've been here for 2 years. Penny and we have a routine. You can't just dismiss me without a reason. Has my performance been lacking?" "Your performance is irrelevant," Drayton lied. He walked to his massive mahogany desk and picked up a thick white envelope. He tossed it to Cooper the polished wood. It slid and stopped at the edge, inches from her hand. 6-month severance. Cash. Take it and be out of the building within the hour. The driver is waiting." Elisha looked at the envelope, then back at him. Her eyes, usually bright and empathetic, narrowed. She wasn't just a terrified employee. She had lived in this house long enough to grow a spine. "I don't want your money, Drayton," she said, dropping the formal title. It made his jaw tighten. "I want to know why." "Yesterday, we were discussing her birthday party. You asked me to bake that chocolate cake she likes. Today, I'm being thrown out like trash." What changed? Drayton felt a flare of anger, but it wasn't at her. It was at himself. What had changed was the moment yesterday morning, when he had walked into the kitchen and seen Elisha dancing with Penny while making pancakes. He had stopped in the doorway, mesmerizingly paralyzed by the sound of his daughter's laughter, a sound he hadn't heard since his wife, Catherine, died 3 years ago. For a fleeting second, Drayton had felt peace, and in his world, peace was a liability. Peace made you slow. Peace got you killed. Worse, he had caught himself looking at Elisha not as an employee, but as a woman who made his house feel like a home. That terrified him more than any rival family or federal indictment, but he couldn't tell her that. "I found a breach in security," Drayton said coldly, inventing the lie on the spot. "Information regarding my schedule was leaked to the Valenti family. The leak came from inside this house." Elisha gasped, a face draining of color. You think I'm a rat? I would never put Penny in danger. I would die for that little girl." "Everyone has a price, Elisha." Maybe the Valentis offered to pay off your father's medical debts. It was a low blow. He knew her father was sick. He had paid for the treatments anonymously, though she didn't know that. Using it as a weapon now made him feel sick. But he had to make her hate him. If she hated him, she would leave. If she left, she would be safe from his enemies and safe from his toxic affection. My father, Elisha whispered, tears welling up in her eyes, raised me to be honest. Something you clearly know nothing about. She didn't touch the envelope. She turned on her heel, her sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. Elisha, he called out, his voice cracking imperceptibly. She paused at the door, her back to him. Don't say goodbye to Penelope, he commanded. It will only make it harder for her. Just go. She didn't respond. She simply opened the door and walked out of his life, leaving the severance pay on the desk. Drayton stared at the white envelope. He picked up his glass and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering shards, but the noise did nothing to drown out the sudden, crushing silence of the penthouse. The next morning, the Mercer household was a tomb. Drayton sat at the head of the long dining table. His suit was impeccable, his hair slicked back, his demeanor icy, but the empty chair to his right, usually occupied by Elisha helping Penny with her breakfast, felt like a gaping wound. Penny sat 3 seats away. She was small for her age, with Drayton's dark eyes and her mother's curly hair. She was pushing her scrambled eggs around the plate with a fork, her legs swinging listlessly. Eat your protein, Penelope, Drayton said, not looking up from his tablet. He was reviewing shipping manifests, or trying to. The numbers were blurring together. Where is she? Penny asked. Her voice was small, barely a whisper. Drayton swiped to the next page. I told you, Elisha had to leave. She had a family emergency. She won't be coming back. She didn't say goodbye, Penny said, her voice trembling. She was in a hurry. She promised. Penny insisted, dropping her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. She promised she would help me draw the invitations for my birthday today. I have hired a new nanny, Drayton said, finally looking at his daughter. Her name is Miss Greta. She is highly qualified. She speaks 3 languages and has a degree in child psychology. She will be here at 9. Penny stared at him. I don't want a degree. I want Elisha. Penelope, enough, Drayton snapped. The stress of the night, he hadn't slept, was fraying his patience. Elisha is gone. Move forward. That is what Mercers do. Penny didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply slid off her chair, leaving her food untouched, and walked out of the room. For the next week, the penthouse became a war zone of silence. Miss Greta lasted 6 hours. She attempted to organize Penny's toys by color. Penny responded by locking herself in the bathroom and refusing to come out until Drayton came home. The next hire, a stern woman named Mrs. Halloway, lasted 2 days. She tried to enforce a strict no television rule. Drayton came home to find Mrs. Halloway sitting in the hallway, sobbing, while Penny sat in the living room watching cartoons at max volume, stone-faced. By the 5th day, Drayton was exhausted. The business was suffering. A shipment of arms from the docks had been intercepted by the police, costing him $3 million. His lieutenant, a man named Vincent, was asking questions about Drayton's lack of focus. Boss, Vincent said one evening in the study, the Russians are pushing into the south side. We need you sharp. You look like hell. I'm handling it, Drayton growled, rubbing his temples. Is it the kid? Vincent asked cautiously. My sister has kids. Maybe send her to boarding school, just for a bit, until things cool down. Drayton's glare could have cut glass. She is my daughter, Vincent. Not a dog to be kennelled. Vincent raised his hands in surrender, just saying, the house feels different, empty. It did. It felt dead. That night, Drayton walked past Penny's room. The door was ajar. He pushed it open softly. Penny was asleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Elisha had stitched up for her when the arm fell off. On the nightstand, there was a picture frame. It used to hold a photo of Drayton and Penny. Now, it was face down. Drayton walked over and picked it up. It wasn't the photo of him. Penny had replaced it with a Polaroid. It was Elisha and Penny at the zoo, their faces smeared with ice cream, laughing uncontrollably. Elisha looked radiant, her eyes crinkled with genuine joy. Drayton felt a physical ache in his chest. He set the photo down and sat on the edge of the bed. He brushed a stray curl from Penny's forehead. "I'm doing this for you, little bird," he whispered. "Everyone around me gets hurt. I couldn't let her get hurt, too." Penny stirred but didn't wake. Drayton left the room, feeling more like a monster than a father. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, 10 days after Elisha's dismissal. Drayton came home early. The deal with the Russians was going south, and he needed to retrieve a secure hard drive from his safe. As he entered the penthouse, he heard shouting. He rushed to the living room. The latest nanny, a young woman named Sarah, was standing over Penny, who was sitting on the floor surrounded by shredded paper. "I told you not to touch my bag," Sarah was yelling. "What is going on here?" Drayton's voice boomed to Cooper the room. Sarah jumped, spinning around. "Mr. Mercer, I'm so sorry. She went through my purse. She's out of control." Drayton looked at his daughter. Penny was sitting amidst the torn paper, her face red, tears streaming down her cheeks. But she wasn't crying out of sadness. She was crying out of rage. "Penny?" Drayton asked sternly. "She stole it," Penny screamed, pointing at Sarah. "She stole Elisha's spot. She sat in Elisha's chair. She's a liar. You're fired," Drayton said to Sarah without missing a beat. "But get out now. Vincent will pay you in the lobby." Sarah fled. Drayton was left alone with his daughter again. He loosened his tie and knelt down to her level. The floor was covered in what looked like torn drawings. "Penny," he said, trying to keep his voice soft, "we can't keep doing this. You have to give them a chance." Penny looked up at him. Her eyes were swollen. "Why did you make her leave, Daddy?" "I told you," Drayton said, reverting to the script. "She did something bad. She betrayed our trust." "No," Penny shouted. She scrambled to her knees and grabbed a piece of paper from under the sofa. It wasn't torn. It was a wrinkled sheet of construction paper. "She didn't do anything bad." Penny shoved the paper at Drayton's chest. "Read it." Drayton took the paper. It was a drawing, done in crayon. It showed a tall, dark figure, him, standing apart from a smaller figure, Penny. In the middle was a woman with red hair, holding both their hands, bridging the gap, but it was the writing on the back that froze Drayton's blood. It was Elisha's handwriting. A note. "My dearest Penny, if you're reading this, it means I had to go. Your daddy is a very important man, and he has to make hard choices to keep you safe. Sometimes grown-ups get scared too. They get scared of losing the things they love, so they push them away before they can be taken. Don't be mad at him. He loves you more than anything. He just forgot how to show it because he's been lonely for a long time. Be patient with him. Remind him to eat dinner. Remind him that it's okay to smile. I love you to the moon and back. Elisha." Drayton read the note twice. His hands began to shake. "I saw you," Penny whispered. Drayton looked up, his vision blurring. "What?" "I saw you looking at her," Penny said, her voice piercingly clear. "That night before you fired her, you were looking at her like you look at Mummy's picture. And then you got mad." Drayton felt like he had been shot. A 6-year-old child had dissected his entire emotional fortress with a single sentence. "She didn't steal anything, Daddy." Penny sobbed, the fight leaving her. "She didn't leave because she didn't love me. She left because you don't love yourself enough to let her stay." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't cold. It was heavy with truth. Drayton looked at the drawing. The bridge between the lonely king and the lonely princess. He realized then that the leak hadn't been real. The paranoia had been a manifestation of his own fear. He hadn't fired Elisha to save the business. He fired her because for the first time in years he had something to lose, and he panicked. He had thrown away the only light in their lives because he was afraid of the dark. A tear, hot and foreign, tracked down Drayton's cheek. He wiped it away angrily, but another followed. He pulled Penny into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and innocence. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking into a sob. "I'm so sorry, Penny." He held her until she stopped crying, rocking her back and forth on the living room floor. When he finally stood up, the mask was gone. The cold, calculated Mafia Don was gone. In his place was a desperate father. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call his hitmen. He didn't call his lawyers. He called Vincent. "Boss," Vincent answered. "Find her," Drayton commanded. His voice was ragged but terrifyingly focused. "Find Elisha Cooper. I don't care if she's on the moon. Find her." "Is she in trouble?" Vincent asked. "No," Drayton said, looking at the drawing in his hand. "But we are. And I need to fix it." But as Drayton would soon find out, fixing this wouldn't be as simple as an apology. Elisha hadn't just disappeared into the suburbs. In the 10 days she had been gone, she had walked straight into a trap, one that Drayton himself had inadvertently set years ago. The phone beeped, a text message from an unknown number. Drayton opened it. It was a photo. Elisha, tied to a chair, a bruise forming on her cheek. Behind her stood a man Drayton thought he had buried 5 years ago. The text read, "You fired the nanny. We hired her. Come and get her, Massa." Drayton dropped the phone. The screen cracked. The drama was no longer about a broken heart. It was about war. The phone in Drayton's hand was no longer a device. It was a death warrant. The screen, spider-webbed with cracks, still displayed the image of Elisha, bound and terrified. But it was the face behind her that turned Drayton's blood to ice. Luca Moretti. Drayton had watched Luca burn inside a warehouse on the west side 5 years ago. It was the night Drayton had solidified his control over the city, the night he had allegedly wiped out the Moretti bloodline. But clearly ghosts didn't send text messages. Luca was alive, scarring, and he had been watching. "Vincent," Drayton said. His voice was devoid of humanity. It was a flat, mechanical sound that made the hairs on Vincent's arms stand up. "Get the car. Call the crew. We are going to war." "Who is it, boss?" Vincent asked, already moving towards the door, his hand instinctively checking the Glock at his hip. "A dead man," Drayton replied. He turned back to Penny, who was still clutching the drawing, her eyes wide with confusion. The rage inside him was a swirling vortex, but he forced it down, burying it deep so he wouldn't frighten her further. He knelt, taking her small hands in his. "Penny, listen to me," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I need you to be brave. Daddy has to go and fix a mistake, a very big mistake." "Are you going to get Elisha?" Penny asked, her voice trembling. Drayton looked at his daughter, the moral compass he had almost shattered. "Yes, I am going to bring her home. I promise." He didn't wait for a response. He stood up and carried Penny to the safe room hidden behind the library bookcase. Inside, Martha, the elderly housekeeper who had been with the family for 30 years and knew how to load a shotgun, was waiting. "Lock the door, Martha," Drayton commanded. "If anyone other than me or Vincent tries to open it, you'll shoot through the panel. Do you understand?" "Understood, sir," Martha said, her face grim. Drayton kissed Penny's forehead one last time, the smell of her strawberry shampoo grounding him for a split second before he turned and walked into the darkness of the hallway. As the heavy steel door clicked shut behind him, Drayton Mercer ceased to be a father. He became the Reaper of Chicago. Underscore, 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 underscore. The rain had turned into a deluge. The city was drowning in it, the gutters overflowing with black water that mirrored the sky. Drayton's convoy, 3 black SUVs with reinforced chassis and bulletproof glass, tore through the streets like predators. Inside the lead vehicle, Drayton sat in the back, loading a magazine into a custom Sig Sauer. Vincent sat opposite him, holding a tablet. "I've run the trace on the number," Vincent said, his fingers flying across the screen. "Burner phone, pinging off a tower in the industrial district. But that covers 5 square miles of abandoned factories. He wants me to find him," Drayton murmured, sliding the gun into his shoulder holster. "Luca isn't hiding. He's staging a show." "Luca Moretti?" Vincent paled. "Boss, we saw the body. The dental records matched." "We saw what he wanted us to see," Drayton snapped. "He's been waiting, biding his time. He knew exactly when to strike. He knew I was vulnerable. Because of the girl. Because I fired her," Drayton admitted, the guilt tasting like ash in his mouth. "She was under my protection as long as she was in the tower. The moment I kicked her out, I put a target on her back. I handed her to him." He remembered Elisha's face when he threw the severance envelope at her, the hurt in her eyes. She hadn't been afraid of him. She had been disappointed. And now she was paying the price for his cowardice. "We have a lead on the vehicle." Vincent interrupted his self-loathing. Traffic cams picked up a grey van leaving the perimeter of the tower, 20 minutes after Miss Cooper left the building. It headed south. "Where did it stop?" "It didn't stop until it hit the shipyard," Vincent said, zooming in on the map. "But look at this heat signature. Satellites are picking up a heat source in the old ironworks foundry. That place has been condemned for a decade." "The ironworks," Drayton repeated. The name brought back memories of his father's era. It was a labyrinth of rusted catwalks and smelting pits. A perfect place for an ambush. A perfect place for a grave. "It's a trap, Drayton," Vincent warned. "He knows you're coming. He has the high ground, he has the hostage, and he likely has the perimeter rigged." "I don't care," Drayton said, checking his watch. It had been an hour since the text. Every minute Elisha was with Luca was a minute she might be bleeding. "Call the tactical team. Tell them to cut the power to the grid in that sector. I want total darkness." "And the rules of engagement." Drayton looked out the window at the blurred city lights. His eyes were void of mercy. "Burn it all down. Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore." The ironworks loomed against the night sky like the skeleton of a dead giant. Smokestacks jabbed into the storm clouds, and the sprawling complex was silent, save for the drumming of rain on rusted, corrugated metal. The convoy stopped half a mile out. Drayton stepped into the rain, the water soaking his suit instantly. He didn't feel the cold. The adrenaline pumping through his veins was hot enough to boil his blood. 12 men, dressed in tactical black, fanned out behind him. They were the best mercenaries money could buy, ex-special forces, loyal only to the Mercer checkbook. But tonight, Drayton led the charge himself. "Vincent, take the east flank." Drayton whispered into his comms earpiece. "Echo team, take the roof. I'm going in the front door." "That's suicide." Vincent's voice crackled in his ear.
"It's distraction,"
Drayton corrected. "He wants to see me. I'm going to give him what he wants while you get into position. Tuo." Drayton walked towards the massive sliding iron doors of the foundry. He held his hands out to his sides, showing he wasn't drawing his weapon yet. He walked with the arrogance of a king, though inside his heart was hammering against his ribs. "Hold on, Elisha. Just hold on." He reached the doors. They were slightly ajar. A single floodlight flickered inside, casting long, dancing shadows. "Nursa," a voice echoed from the rafters. It was distorted, bouncing off the steel walls, but Drayton recognized the sneer. "Luca," Drayton shouted back, stepping into the cavernous main hall. The smell of rust and old oil was overpowering. "I'm here. Let the girl go. She has nothing to do with us." A laugh, sharp and manic, rang out. "She has everything to do with us, Drayton. She's the crack in your armor. I watched you. I watched you through the scope of a rifle for 3 weeks. I saw you watching her. I saw you soften, high up on a catwalk, 40 feet above the concrete floor. A spotlight clicked on." Drayton's breath hitched. Elisha was tied to a steel chair, perilously close to the edge of the railing. Her mouth was gagged with duct tape, her hair matted with blood on the side of her head. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting between Drayton and the figure standing behind her. Luca Moretti stepped into the light. Half of his face was a ruin of melted scar tissue, a souvenir from the fire, Drayton had said. He held a detonator in one hand and a pistol pressed to Elisha's temple in the other. "You look good, Drayton," Luca rasped. "Better than me, anyway." "Let her go, Luca," Drayton said, his voice echoing. "This is between you and me. Come down here and finish it." "Oh, I intend to finish it," Luca smiled, the scar tissue stretching hideously. "But first, I want to watch you break. You fired her to save her, didn't you? You thought if you pushed her away, she'd be safe. How's that working out for you?" Drayton took a step forward. "I will give you anything. Territory, money, the routes to the harbor. Just let her walk." Elisha made a muffled sound, shaking her head violently. Her eyes were pleading with him, not to save her, but to run. She knew it was a trap. "I don't want your money," Luca spat. "I want your suffering. I want you to feel what I felt when my skin was melting off my bones." He clicked the safety off the gun, pressed to Elisha's head. "Say goodbye to the nanny, Drayton." Time seemed to slow down. Drayton saw the tension in Luca's finger on the trigger. He saw the tears mixing with the blood on Elisha's face. He saw the distance, too far to shoot, too far to run. Now, Drayton screamed into his comms. The skylights above the catwalk shattered inward as 4 members of Echo Team rappelled down on zip lines. At the same moment, the main power grid to the district was cut. The spotlight died, plunging the foundry into absolute pitch blackness. For a second, there was silence. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted from the rafters. Muzzle flashes strobed like lightning in the dark, illuminating brief, violent vignettes. Drayton didn't wait for his eyes to adjust. He had memorized the layout of the catwalk in the split second before the lights died. He sprinted toward the rusted staircase, taking the steps 3 at a time. Bullets sparked off the metal railing near his head. He didn't flinch. "Vincent, status," he roared. "We're engaging hostiles on the ground floor." Vincent yelled over the sound of automatic fire. "Get to the girl." Drayton reached the 2nd level. A shadow lunged at him from the dark. One of Luca's goons. Drayton didn't slow down. He caught the man's wrist, twisted it with a bone-snapping crunch, and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The guard fell, gasping. Drayton vaulted over the body and kept running. He reached the catwalk where Elisha had been. It was empty. The chair was tipped over. "Drayton!" Elisha's scream came from higher up. The 3rd level, the smelting platform. Luca was dragging her up the maintenance ladder. He was moving towards the roof. "I'm coming," Drayton yelled. He scrambled up the ladder, his suit jacket catching on a jagged bolt and tearing. He ripped it free, discarding the expensive fabric. He emerged onto the smelting platform, a narrow grid of metal suspended over what used to be a blast furnace. It was cold now, a black pit dropping 50 feet down. But the danger was the fall. The storm outside had intensified, and lightning flashed through the broken windows, illuminating the platform in staccato bursts. Luca stood at the far end of the platform, his back to the exit door. He had his arm hooked around Elisha's neck, using her as a human shield. He was firing wildly at the Echo Team members, trying to flank him. "Back off," Luca screamed, "or she goes over the rail." Drayton held up his hand, signaling his men to hold their fire. He stepped onto the grating, 20 feet away from them. He was breathing hard, rain and sweat dripping down his face. "It's over, Luca," Drayton said, his chest heaving. "My men have the building. You have nowhere to go." "I have the exit," Luca yelled, dragging Elisha backward. She stumbled, her sneakers slipping on the wet metal. She looked terrified, but as her eyes met Drayton's, something shifted. She saw him, not the boss, not the monster. The man who had held his daughter on the floor. "Drayton," she choked out. "It's okay," Drayton said softly, his voice high and dying, carrying over the wind. "I've got you." "Touching reunion," Lucas sneered. He aimed his gun at Drayton's chest. "Drop your weapon, Mercer. Kick it over the edge, or I put a bullet in her spine right now." Drayton didn't hesitate. He slowly pulled the Sig Sauer from his holster. He held it up, showing Luca, and then dropped it through the grate. It clattered as it hit the metal beams below, falling into the abyss. "Happy?" Drayton asked, raising his empty hands. "Delirious," Luca grinned. "Now kneel." Drayton gritted his teeth and slowly sank to his knees on the wet grating. He was surrendering his power, his dignity, everything he had built his reputation on. "You're weak," Luca laughed, stepping closer, dragging Elisha with him. The great Drayton Mercer, on his knees for the help. Elisha felt Luca's grip loosen slightly as he reveled in his victory. She knew this was the only chance. She didn't think. She acted. She stomped her heel down onto Luca's instep with all her strength. Luca howled in surprise, his grip faltering. Elisha threw her head back, smashing her skull into his broken nose. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was enough. Luca stumbled back, releasing her for a fraction of a second. "Run, Elisha." Drayton roared, launching himself from his kneeling position like a coiled spring. He covered the distance in 2 seconds. He tackled Luca just as the gun went off. Bang! The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Drayton felt a searing, white-hot poker drive into his left shoulder. The impact spun him around, but his momentum carried him into Luca. They both crashed into the railing. The railing, rusted and weakened by years of neglect, groaned. "Let go of me," Luca shrieked, clawing at Drayton's face. Drayton ignored the pain in his shoulder. He grabbed Luca by the lapels of his leather jacket. They wrestled on the edge of the abyss, the metal creaking ominously under their combined weight. "Elisha, get back!" Drayton shouted, struggling to keep his footing on the slick surface. Elisha didn't run. She looked around frantically for a weapon. She saw a loose length of iron pipe lying near the wall. She grabbed it, her hands shaking. Luca had the upper hand. He was uninjured, while Drayton's left arm was hanging uselessly, blood pouring down his white shirt. Luca pinned Drayton against the railing, his thumbs pressing into Drayton's windpipe. "Die!" Luca screamed, spit flying onto Drayton's face. "Just die!" Drayton's vision began to tunnel. He couldn't breathe. He saw Luca's scarred face, twisted in hate. He thought of Penny. He thought of the note. Remind him it's okay to smile. Then a metallic clang rang out. Luca's eyes went wide. He slumped forward, his grip releasing. Behind him stood Elisha, the iron pipe raised high, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She had struck him a coup at the back of the head. Luca groaned, sliding down to his knees. He looked up at Elisha, dazed. "You..." Drayton didn't waste the opening. With his good arm, he grabbed Luca by the collar and shoved him. Luca tipped backward over the broken railing. He didn't scream. He just fell, disappearing into the darkness of the pit below. A second later, there was a dull thud. Drayton sagged against the remaining rail, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He slid down to the floor, his energy completely spent. Drayton. Elisha dropped the pipe and fell to her knees beside him. Her hands hovered over his wound, afraid to touch it. "Oh my God, you're shot, you're shot." "I'm okay," Drayton wheezed, though the edges of his vision were going black. Is he gone?" Elisha looked over the edge, then back at him. She nodded, sobbing. "He's gone." Drayton tried to smile. You have a hell of a swing, Miss Cooper." Elisha laughed, a choked, hysterical sound. She ripped off her scarf and pressed it against his shoulder to staunch the bleeding. "You idiot! You came for me. You walked in here without a gun." "I couldn't let him take you," Drayton whispered, his hand finding hers. His grip was weak, but warm. "Penny. Penny needs her mother figure back, Erda." Elisha froze. She looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there. "And you?" "I need..." Drayton's voice faded. The blood loss was catching up to him. His head lolled back against the metal. "Drayton! Drayton!" Elisha screamed, shaking him. "Boss!" Vincent's voice came from the ladder. "Medics! Get the medics up here now!" The world blurred into a kaleidoscope of lights and shouting voices. Drayton felt himself being lifted. The last thing he felt was Elisha's hand squeezing his, refusing to let go. The siege was over, but the battle for survival had just begun. The waiting room at St. Jude's Medical Center was a sterile purgatory of white walls and humming fluorescent lights. It was a private wing, paid for by the Mercer Foundation, meaning there were no other families sobbing in the corners. Just Elisha. She sat on a stiff vinyl chair, her clothes still stiff with dried mud and the rust of the ironworks. Her hands were trembling, wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee she hadn't touched. Every time the double doors swung open, her heart hammered against her ribs, expecting the worst. It had been 6 hours since the helicopter medevaced Drayton from the foundry roof. 6 hours since she watched the life drain from his face as he bled out in her arms. "Miss Cooper," Elisha snapped her head up. A surgeon, looking exhausted, stood in the doorway. He pulled off his surgical cap. His name tag read, "Dr. Evans." "Is he?" Elisha couldn't finish the sentence. "He's alive," Dr. Evans said, and the breath rushed out of Elisha's lungs in a sob. But it was close. The bullet nicked the subclavian artery. He lost a lot of blood. We had to perform a bypass and reconstruct the vessel. He's in the ICU now, medically induced coma to let the body heal. The next 48 hours are critical. "Can I see him?" "Briefly. He won't hear you, but sometimes they know." Elisha nodded, wiping her eyes. She stood up, her legs feeling like lead, and followed the doctor down the silent corridor. When she entered the room, the sight broke her heart all over again. Drayton Mercer, the man who made Chicago tremble, the man who stood like a titan in his penthouse window, looked small. He was pale, almost translucent, hooked up to a rhythmic symphony of beeping machines. A thick bandage covered his left shoulder and chest. Elisha walked to the bedside. She reached out and took his hand. It was cold, calloused, and lifeless. "You promised," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You told Penny you were going to fix it. You don't get to leave now, Drayton. You don't get to take the easy way out." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. So you better wake up." For 3 days, Drayton drifted in the grey space between life and death. And for 3 days, Elisha didn't leave the hospital. Vincent brought her fresh clothes and food, which she barely ate. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, hitting Drayton's face. Elisha was asleep in the chair next to the bed, her head resting on the mattress near his hand. Drayton opened his eyes. The light was blinding. Pain, sharp and immediate, radiated from his shoulder with every breath. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, like it was made of concrete. He looked down. He saw the auburn hair spilling over the white sheets. He saw the hand clutching his. Elisha. Memory flooded back. The foundry, the gun, the fall, the look in her eyes when she swung that pipe. He tried to speak, but his throat was like sandpaper. He coughed, a dry, rasping sound. Elisha jolted awake. She looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot. When she saw him looking back at her, she burst into tears. "You're awake," she gasped, pressing the nurse call button frantically. "Oh my God, you're awake." "Don't cry," Drayton rasped, his voice a ghost of its former self. "I hate when you cry." "Too bad," she laughed through the tears, stroking his cheek. "You scared me, Drayton. You scared me so much." "I got you out," he whispered. "Yes, you did." The recovery was not a montage. It was a war of attrition. 2 weeks later, Drayton was discharged, but he was far from well. He insisted on returning to the penthouse, refusing a rehabilitation center. "I recover in my own home," he had growled at Dr. Evans. But the penthouse had changed. The cold, empty museum was now a hive of activity. Penny was the best medicine. She spent hours sitting on the edge of his bed, reading him stories from her school books, careful not to touch his ouchy arm. Elisha, however, was the general. She managed his medication schedule, his physical therapy exercises, and his diet. She was relentless. When Drayton tried to get up to take a call from the commission about a territory dispute in the North End, Elisha confiscated his phone. "Give it back, Elisha," Drayton warned, sitting on the edge of the bed in sweatpants, looking more dangerous half-naked and wounded than most men did fully armed. "I have a business to run." "The business can wait," Elisha said, putting the phone in her pocket. "Vincent is handling it. You need to rest. Dr. Evans said your blood pressure is too high." "I am the head of this family," Drayton snapped. "I don't take orders from the nanny." The room went silent. Drayton immediately regretted the words. He saw the flash of hurt in her eyes, the reminder of the day he fired her. "I'm sorry," he muttered, looking away. "I'm frustrated. I feel useless." Elisha softened. She walked over and sat next to him. "You're not useless, Drayton. You're human. You saved my life. You took a bullet for me. That's not useless. That's everything." She reached out and traced the edge of the bandage on his chest. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through him that had nothing to do with pain. "Why did you come back?" Drayton asked quietly. "After I fired you. After I put you in danger. Why are you still here nursing a monster back to health?" Elisha looked him in the eye. "Because the monster didn't fire me to hurt me. He did it to save me. And because—" She hesitated, her cheeks flushing pink. "Because Penny needs her father. And maybe I need him too." Drayton looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the strength beneath the kindness. He saw the woman who had bludgeoned a hitman to save him. "I'm not a good man, Elisha," he said hoarsely. "My world is dark. It's violent. It will never be safe." "I know," she whispered. "But I'm not asking for safe. I'm asking for real." Drayton closed the distance. He kissed her. It wasn't the kiss of a movie star. It was desperate, filled with the taste of pain medication and longing. It was a seal on a promise he hadn't spoken yet. When they broke apart, Drayton rested his forehead against hers. "I'm never firing you again," he murmured. "Good," she smiled, "because I'd sue for wrongful termination." 3 months had passed since the gunfire ceased at the ironworks, and the Mercer Tower, usually a monolith of cold steel and silence, had undergone a transformation that baffled the Chicago underworld. Tonight, the Grand Ballroom, a space typically reserved for tense sit-downs with rival families, corrupt senators, and brooding captains, was unrecognizable. It had been turned into an enchanted forest. Massive oak branches, synthesized by high-end decorators, curved over the marble pillars. Thousands of fairy lights draped from the vaulted ceiling like weeping willows made of stars. A chocolate fountain the size of a small car bubbled near the entrance. And the air, usually smelling of expensive cologne and ozone, was thick with the scent of spun sugar and vanilla. It was Penelope Mercer's 7th birthday party. And for the first time in the building's history, the sound echoing off the walls wasn't shouting or breaking glass. It was the high-pitched, unbridled laughter of children. Drayton stood on the mezzanine balcony, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. He wore a tuxedo cut from midnight blue silk, tailored to conceal the lingering stiffness in his left shoulder. The wound from the foundry had healed into a jagged, angry scar, a permanent topography of the night he almost died. It ached when it rained, a phantom reminder of his mortality. But he welcomed the pain. It was proof he was still here. Vincent, his second in command, stepped up beside him. He looked uncomfortable in a light grey suit, his eyes scanning the crowd below with the habitual paranoia of a career criminal. "You know, boss," Vincent murmured, watching a group of 6-year-olds aggressively tackle a hired clown near the DJ booth. "I've stared down the barrel of a lot of guns. I've negotiated with the cartel. But this is terrifying." Drayton chuckled, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. It felt less rusty than it used to. "It's a birthday party, Vincent. Try to relax. The perimeter is secure." "The perimeter is fine," Vincent said, loosening his tie. "It's the glitter. I'm going to be finding glitter in my tactical gear for weeks. He took a sip of his drink before his tone shifted, becoming lower, more serious. Speaking of the perimeter, the shipment from the East Coast cleared customs this morning. Smooth sailing. Drayton nodded, his gaze fixed on the dance floor. And the chatter? Quiet as a grave, Vincent confirmed. Since Luca went down, nobody has dared to even look at our territory sideways. The rumor on the street is that you killed him with your bare hands while bleeding out from a chest wound. It's good for the reputation. Fear keeps the peace. Let them talk, Drayton said softly. Let them think I'm a monster. As long as they stay away from this tower. And how is the internal management? Vincent grinned, nodding towards the center of the ballroom. Drayton followed his gaze, and the hardness in his eyes melted instantly. Elisha was in the center of the room, radiant in an emerald green dress that hugged her curves and flared out at the waist, moving like liquid as she spun. Her auburn hair was loose, catching the fairy lights. She was holding Penny's hands, swinging the little girl around in a circle. Penny's head was thrown back in pure joy, her crown of curls bouncing, her smile wide and gap-toothed. They looked like a painting. They looked like a future Drayton hadn't thought he deserved. Management is effective, Drayton replied, setting his glass on the railing. Go on, Vincent nudged him, before the clown surrenders and we have a hostage situation. Drayton straightened his jacket and walked down the grand marble staircase. As he descended, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The parents, mostly associates, wives of lieutenants, and a few brave school friends, parted ways. The security guards straightened their postures. He was still the king of Chicago, the predator in the high castle. But as he stepped onto the dance floor, the predator vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous, a father. The music slowed, transitioning from a frantic pop song to a gentle jazz melody. Drayton approached the pair laughing in the center of the room. May I cut in? Drayton asked, bowing slightly to his daughter. Penny stopped spinning, breathless and giggling. Daddy, you don't dance. For you I do, he said solemnly. He picked Penny up, lifting her high effortlessly despite the ache in his shoulder, and spun her once before setting her down gently. But first, I need to borrow Elisha, just for a moment. Penny grinned conspiratorially, her eyes darting between the two adults. Okay, but you owe me cake. She ran off toward the dessert table, her patent leather shoes clicking on the floor. Drayton turned to Elisha. She was breathless, her skin glowing with a light sheen of perspiration, her eyes bright. Mr. Mercer, she teased, curtsying mockingly, leaving your post on the balcony. I thought you preferred to brood from a distance. The view is better down here, he said, his voice dropping an octave. He stepped into a personal space, the magnetic pull between them undeniable. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers, and placed his other hand on the small of her back. They began to sway. You threw a hell of a party, Elisha, Drayton said, pulling her slightly closer than was appropriate for an employer and his employee. I didn't think this room could ever look warm. Penny deserves it, she said softly, looking up at him. She's been through a lot. She needed magic. We all have, Drayton corrected. He stopped dancing. The music continued to play, a soft saxophone solo, but Drayton let go of her waist. He reached into his tuxedo pocket, his heart hammering against his ribs harder than it ever had during a raid. The room seemed to sense the shift. Conversations died down. The DJ lowered the volume. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the center of the floor. Elisha, Drayton said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. She froze, her smile faltering slightly into confusion. Drayton, what is it? 3 months ago, I tried to push you out of this life, he began, his voice steady but raw with emotion. I thought I could protect you by sending you away. I thought my world was too dark for someone like you. I was wrong. He took a step closer, capturing her gaze. You didn't just survive my world, Elisha. You saved it. You are the only thing that makes this life worth living. You and Penny. Elisha's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering under the fairy lights. Drayton didn't kneel. His knees still gave him trouble from the fall, and he was a man who bowed to no one. But he held out a small, black velvet box. He snapped it open. Inside sat a diamond that caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny stars. It wasn't just a rock. It was a fortress. It was the Mercer's seal of protection, and a promise of devotion. "I don't need a nanny anymore," Drayton said, his dark eyes vulnerable and fierce, stripping away every layer of defense he had built over 30 years. "I need a partner. I need a wife. I need a mother for my daughter." He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with the scent of vanilla and hope. "Elisha Cooper, will you marry me?" Elisha didn't hesitate. She didn't look at the crowd or the guards or the diamond. She looked at the scar on his forehead, the lines of worry etched around his eyes. The man who had walked through fire and taken a bullet just to bring her home. "Yes," she whispered, the word escaping like a prayer. Then louder, filled with joy, "Yes, Drayton, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He pulled her into a kiss that was desperate and claiming, a kiss that earned a thunderous round of applause from the entire room. Penny, abandoning her cake, ran back onto the dance floor. She squeezed between them, wrapping her small arms around their legs. Drayton broke the kiss, laughing, a genuine, full laugh. He scooped Penny up in his left arm and wrapped his right arm around Elisha, pulling them both into a tight embrace. High above the city, the storm clouds that had plagued Chicago for weeks had finally cleared. The skyline glittered below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a kingdom of lights. The Mafia boss had his empire. But for the first time in his life, Drayton realized the empire wasn't the buildings, the money, or the guns. The empire was right here, in his arms. And God help anyone who ever tried to touch it again. And that, my friends, is how the most feared man in Chicago learned that the strongest weapon in his arsenal wasn't a gun. It was love. Drayton tried to fire the nanny to save her, but in the end, she was the one who saved him. It's a reminder that even in the darkest worlds, family isn't just about blood. It's about who is willing to bleed for you. If this story touched your heart, or if you just loved seeing a Mafia boss get put in his place by a 6-year-old, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. I post new drama and romance every week. What did you think of Elisha's choice? Would you have gone back to the Foundry? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.